All right, guys, this is Super Mike 2164. We're on the B1 Math Science and History channel. It's an upload for you guys. And we're still going to go into part two of the Anunnaki by Dr. Wesley. The seats of power are passed down from father to son. The supreme being among them is Allah, and collectively, these 12 are also called Allah. And this is some of the footnotes. So, Anu in Sumerian tradition, Mullen, the Assembly of the Gods, True Islam, the Book of Gods, the Theology of Time, Honorable Elijah Muhammad's meeting, the Problem Book by W.D. Farrar, Finder of the Lost Nation of Finder of the Lost Nation of Asia, problem number 32. All right. The Holy Quran refers to this divine body as Al-Mala Al-Allah, the assembly, the exalted assembly. And this can be found in the Quran 37 and 8, 38, 69, and 70. Surah and Ayats. They are also called the 12 Imams. The recognition and or worshiping of this Theon, 12 gods, is at the root of ancient religion. The ancient Egyptians knew of Nishuru, company of the gods, consisting of 12 deities, associates with the zodiac, 12 Adityas, what this is or supreme sovereigns of Sanskrit literature, are Indic reflections on this same divine court. The Greek Olympian gods are rooted in this ancient Aboriginal tradition, which itself represents the widespread recognition and theologizing upon the exalted assembly, 12 major scientists, enthroned in Black Arabia as sovereign lords of the cosmos. So he goes into the Encyclopedia of the Quran. This is a reference to the celestial court of God with his angels as both divine ruler and judge. Encyclopedia of the Quran. Court by Khalid Ya Blankenship. Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Birth of a Savior. Savior's Day 1958. Transcribed in Birth of a Savior by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Messenger of God. The Coalition for Remembrance of Elijah in 1993, 36 and 37. The 12 major Imams, The 12 major Imams, as they are called in Islam or in Arab language, Muhammad message to the black man. So he goes through some of that in the footnotes. As for all human activities, so they, Egyptians, said, agreeing with themselves. The Egyptians, first of all, men discovered the year, dividing the 12 parts of the seasons into it. They said they found this out from the stars. Each year, the Egyptians add to the 12 30-day months 5 days beyond the number. And for them, the circle of the seasons as it passes comes around to the same point. They said that the Egyptians first recognized the eponyms of the 12 gods for the months, and the Greeks borrowed from them, and that they first assigned altars and images and temples for the gods and carved living beings in stone. Herodotus, and this was 485 to 525 BC. Histories. All right. And this fragment of a Hellenistic relief, which is 1st century BC, 1st century AD, depicting the 12 Olympians. So this fragment of a Hellenistic relief, the 1st century BC to 1st century AD, depicting the 12 Olympians carrying their attributes in procession from left to right. Hestia with the scepter, Hermes with the wing, cap, and staff, Aphrodite is veiled, Ares, helmet and spear, Demeter, scepter and wheat sheaf, Hephaestus with the staff, Hera with the scepter, Poseidon, trident, Athena, the owl and helmet, Zeus, the thunderbolt and staff, Artemis, the bow and quiver, and Apollo, lyre. From Walter's Art Museum. The ancient Mesopotamians also knew of this Pulgir Ilyani, Council of Gods. The 12 higher order Anunnaki gods also associated with the zodiac. Diodorus Siculus in the 1st century BC wrote Bibliotheca Historia. The Chaldeans say that the chief of these gods are 12 in number, to each of whom they assign a month and one of the 12 so-called zodiac signs. This description has proved true, as Richard E. Averback and Ian Rutherford report. The Sumerian pantheon is understood as a hierarchy with An, Enlil, Nirsag, and Enki as the top four, with several other deities closely related to them, including Nana, the moon god, Utu, the sun god, and Inanna, the goddess of the morning and evening stars. 12 deities were responsible for making the various elements of the larger Sumerian world order function properly and efficiently. They constitute a higher order of deities. It has often been claimed that the Anunnaki correspond roughly to the Titans of Greek mythology, who are also 12 in number, divided equally into male and female, perceived as deities of a previous generation and associated with the Chthonic realm. The correspondence between Anunnaki and Titans is close enough for us to offer the hypothesis that in Greek religion, the idea of a set of 12 gods was applied first to the Titans, in imitation of the Anunnaki. So these are some pics. See, and this number 10 shows 12 symbols carved on the Assyrian rock reliefs at Bavarian by order of King Sennacherib, reigned from 704 to 781 BC. The accompanying inscription involves 12 deities in corresponding order, namely Asur, Anu, Enlil, E, Sin, Samas, Adad, Marduk, Nabu, Nergal, Ishtar, and the seven. Interesting. So these are the symbols here. The seven. From Jeremy Black and Anthony Green, Gods, Demons, and Symbols of Ancient Mesopotamia. An illustrated dictionary, illustrations by Tessa Rickards, uh, London. The Trustees of British Museums, 2004. All right. Ancient Hittite relief carving from Yazilikaya, a sanctuary of Hat-Usa near modern Bozkal, Turkey. Bozkal, Turkey. It depicts 12 gods of the underworld whom the Hittites identify as the Mesopotamian Anunnaki. One of the chief functions of this divine assembly was to decide the fates of humanity. The head god or judge of the Anunnaki was called this is going to be something, Lugald Dimmer Ankia. Lugal Dimmerankia. All right. Which means the king of the gods of the heavens and earth. Anu, the father of the gods, was always the Lugal Dimmerankia until he was replaced by the Anunnaki with Marduk, the young god. The way this transition takes place is a perfect example of how the Sumerian council functions. In the Enuma Elish, the old Babylonian creation epic, the Anunnaki gods were looking for a champion to slay the evil Tiamat. The young god, Marduk, approached them saying, I will accomplish all that is in your hearts. I will be your avenger and slay Tiamat. But you must make me supreme. From now on, my words will fix destinies of the gods, and whatever I create will remain unchanged. The Anunnaki first tested Marduk. They spread the starry canopy in the sky and challenged Marduk to remove it by his word. After succeeding in this and the challenge to make it reappear, the gods prostrated themselves before Marduk and proclaimed joyfully, Marduk is king, the tablet reads. They erected for him a princely throne. Thou art most honored of the great gods. Thy decree is unrivaled. From this day, unchangeable shall be thy pronouncement. To raise or bring low, these shall be in thy hand. Thy utterance shall be true, thy command unimpeachable. No one among the gods shall transgress thy bounds. The office of Luga Dimmerankia was not a permanent position. Just as the president sits in that seat for a specific term, so did the judge or king of the Anunnaki gods hold that office for a specific term called Bala. The term or period was named after the particular incumbent, just as we refer to the Reagan administration or to the Bush administration. This is exactly as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches. He says, the planet Earth was governed by 24 wise scientists. The wisest of these scientists was he that was the supreme being, and the name of his great office was Allah, just as the name of the office of the leader in this country is president, and just as the man who is called by the name president may die and another man may take his place, so is it with he that is called by the name Allah, but the name remains forever. The Sumerian council met on a mountain called Uber Shu Kaine, this dwelling of the Anunnaki gods, according to a scholarly reading of the old Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, is atop Mount Hermon, which is located between the borders of Syria and Lebanon. The top part of Arabia, and Arabia is basically Arabia, basically Africa. And an explanation of Africa and Arabia is literally part of the same tectonic plates or continent. So, the top part of Arabia. Other texts state that the Divine Council meets in the land of Dilmun, which is located in the Arabian Gulf. See below. As the gods arrived at the court, there is embracing between them, and they first have a banquet. They joyfully ate and drank before the meeting moved to more serious matters. A very interesting example of the proceedings of the assembly is here given from the cuneiform tablets. All the great gods who decreed the fates entered before Ansar. They filled Ubashukina. They kissed each other when they met together in the assembly. They conversed as they sat in the banquet. They ate bread. They poured sweet drink. They made their throats flow with sweet drink. Quickly they became carefree as the spirit rose. For Marduk, their avenger, they fixed his decree. This shows the astonishingly human-like nature of this council. Here before a meeting, all the participants greet each other with kisses and conversation. They are then entertained with a banquet. Only after the eating and drinking does the assembly get down to business. This is like a typical executive board meeting. In these meetings, the gods make such decisions as to send a flood down to drown mankind, or to establish kingships in the land. In the creation epic of Mesopotamia, there is described a meeting with the council under King Marduk to pass judgment against the rebellious god named Kingu. Marduk places the call to the gods to assemble. Let the great gods be here in assembly. Let the guilty be handed over that they may endure. Marduk summoned the great gods to assembly, presiding graciously. He issues instructions. To his utterance the gods pay heed. The king addresses a word to the Anunnaki. Who was it that contrived the uprising and made Tiamat rebel and join the battle? Let him be handed over. I guess I reread the same thing. Hold on a second. Who contrived the uprising? The Igi, the great gods, replied to him, to Luga-Dimiranki, counselor of the gods, their lord. It was Kingu who contrived the uprising. The ancient Sumerians and Babylonians acknowledged the existence of this council of gods. This highest level of divine assembly was composed of 12 higher region or heavenly gods. The judge, or Luga-Dimiranki, was to serve an appointed term called the Bala. The council had total control over the workings of the universe and affairs of men. All right, Summer, land of the black gods. The Afro-Sumerians in the bilingual hymns elsewhere, the Sumerians are called sometimes blackheads, sometimes black faces, and this black race seems to be meant by the word adamatu, which is given as the equivalent of the Akkadian Adama. The latter word expressed by two ideographs, which literally denoted black blood. The well-known Sumerian problem is the most intractable in all of Mesopotamian studies, formerly called Esserology. While this problem mainly centers on whether the builders of ancient Mesopotamia civilization were indigenous or immigrants to the Tigris and Euphrates Valley, equally controversial is the question of their linguistic and ethnic context. For example, the images which appear in the average textbooks, authentic paintings and statuettes, as well as embellished reconstructions, seem to clearly indicate the Sumerians were a stubby, round-headed, Caucasian, Armenoid race who possibly originated in the area north of Mesopotamia and may be spoke a Uralic Altic language. But there were always reasons to doubt this popular conclusion. Sir Leonard Woolley, British archaeologist who excavated the ancient Mesopotamian city of Ur, wrote, for example, "Our whole knowledge of the Sumerians is but a thing of yesterday, but as soon as any monuments came to light, the question posed itself, who were these people? The first representations of Sumerian art to be discovered were sculptures, and among the many sculptured figures which were found, one type constantly reappeared, showing a squat, heavy, round-headed, clean-shaven man. This type was predominant amongst the monuments discovered, and it was assumed that here we had the typical Sumerian. There was evidently no mixture of race and no problem to be solved except to find out what the particular people who were what the particular people were who were so represented. But then other monuments came to light, which side by side with these clean-shaven, squat, solid types show people who were not squat, who wore short beards and were not clean-shaven, but had their hair cut round the nape of the neck. They performed menial operations, and the theory was at once put forward that these people represented not Sumerians at all, but foreign slaves, presumably from the north elsewhere, and certainly having nothing to do with the dominant people of the country. Then the question was further complicated. Figures of gods were found with long hair and long, elaborately combed and curled beards. Why should a people themselves clean-shaven worship gods with beards. So this is a problem. So these are some of the artwork coming out of Sumeria. So the standard Ur, Tel Asma Horde. So woolly, squat, round-handed, and shaven Sumerian is illustrated best by the famous standard of Ur discovered during Woolley's excavation of the royal cemetery of Ur. The other Sumerian, tall with long hair and beard, is represented by a horde of statues unearthed at the ancient city of Eshuna, modern Tel Asmar, north of Mesopotamia, both representations which equally dominate modern conceptions of the Sumerians depict these ancient civilization builders as apparently Caucasoid or Europoid, whether short and beardless or tall and bearded. On the other hand, there was a course of 19th and 20th century scholars, both amateur historians and renowned Assyriologists, black and white, who were convinced of just the opposite, that the ancient Mesopotamians were black Cushites. Sir Henry Rawlinson, the decipherer of the cuneiform script and father of Assyriology, came to this conclusion in 1858, and his authoritative word carried the day. George Rawlinson, Camden Professor of Ancient History of the University of Oxford and Sir Henry's brother, reported, "A laborious study of the primitive language of Chaldea led Sir Henry Rawlinson, the earliest decipherer of the ancient Babylonian monuments, to the conviction that the dominant race in Babylonia at the earliest time which the monuments reached back was Cushite. He found the vocabulary of the primitive race to be decidedly Cushite or Ethiopian, and he was able to interpret the inscriptions chiefly by the aid which was furnished to him from published works on the Gala Abyssinia, which is Abyssinian, and the Mahra, South Arabian dialects. He noted, moreover, a considerable resemblance in the system of writing which the primitive race employed and that which was established from a very remote date in Egypt. Both were pictorial, both to a certain extent symbolic. Both in some instances used identically the same symbols. Again, he found words in use among the primitive Babylonians and their neighbors and kinsmen and Susanians, which seem to be identical with ancient Egyptian and Ethiopic roots. The root hike or hack, which Mantheo interprets as king, and which is found in the well-known Hyksos or shepherd kings, appeared in Babylonian and Sasanian royal names under the form Khan, and the terminal element, which is its position also in royal Ethiopic names, the name Turkhak, is common in the royal list of Sasanian and Ethiopia, as that of Nimrod is to the royal list of Babylon and Egypt. The sun god is called Ra in Egyptian, and Ra was the Cushite name of the supreme god of the Babylonians. Many other close analogies might be mentioned, but these are probably sufficient as specimens. With such authoritative pronouncement, it is no wonder that historians, both black and white, affirm that the Chaldeans were originally Negroes. All the best qualified investigators agree that the evidence already obtained shows conclusively the Cushite and Ethiopic origin of Chaldea. The Cushites were the black race, and the Aborigines of Babylonia were the black men of the monuments, the black-headed or Akkadian texts. The monuments of Babylonia furnish abundant evidence of the fact that a Hamitic race held possession of that country in the earliest times and continued to be a powerful element in the population down to a period but very little preceding the ascension of Nebuchadnezzar. Sir Henry Rawlinson, on the ethnic affinities of the nations of Western Asia, and George Rawlinson, The History of Herodotus. It is within the limits of Asia and Africa that the first civilized peoples had their development. The Egyptians in the Nile Valley, the Chaldeans in the plain of Euphrates. They were peoples of sedentary and peaceful pursuits. Their skins were dark, the hair short and thick, the lips strong. Babylon had two elements in her population in the beginning. The North Akkadians and the Southern Sumerians were both Cushites. The finds of recent exploration in the Mesopotamian Valley reveal that these ancient inhabitants were black, with the cranial formation of Ethiopians. How are we to reconcile the testimony of such towering figures in Mesopotamian studies, the Rawlinson brothers, as well as the chorus of voices in agreement from enlightened historians, professional and amateur, on one hand, with the ostensible testimony of images we see on the other? We resolve this conflict by disregarding the above and similar image for reasons that will be elaborated below. Osteology trumps iconography. So, judging from the physical, textual, and monumental remains, prehistoric and early historic Mesopotamia consisted of three basic ethnic groups. Sumerian group inhabitants, the south, whose language relationships are still a matter of conjecture, but was likely African Niger-Congo. A Semitic-speaking group in the north central area, an area called Akkad, a minority of uncertain origin diffused throughout. These latter may be related to the groups north and east of Akkad, like those from the Zagros Mountains, a people fair-haired and speaking a Caucasian tongue, a hill people akin to the Guti. It was once thought that summer in the south and Akkad in the north stood in sharp contrast, distinguished by the race and language of those who lived in them. Geoff Emberling's words are thus appropriate. There is no evidence for separate Sumerian and Akkadian ethnic groups in 3rd millennium Mesopotamia. This means that correctly identifying the ethnic background of one, the Sumerians, illuminates for us the ethnic background of the other, the Akkadians, and vice versa. Excavations conducted in the beginning of the 20th century in Al-Ubad, 4000 BCE, and Ur, 1900 and 1700 BCE, in the south and Kish, and Kish, 2900 to 2800 BCE, in the north, produced human remains of the two main ethnic groups inhabiting the area. The finds from Al-Ubad represents the main remains of the country's earlier Sumerian inhabitants, and those in Ur represents Akkadians. In Kish, a mix of both groups, Sumerians and Akkadians, is represented. At Kish is evidence of the penetration of a third ethnic group into North Mesopotamia. Sir Arthur Keith of the Museum of the Royal College of Surgeons, England, reported on the Al-Ubad and Ur remains. Both were dolichocephalic, long and narrow heads. The Ur remains were a people with a narrower head than the Al-Ubadians. And this suggested to Keith that the 2nd millennia and new people had entered the area. But Keith emphasizes the people of Al-Ubad and Ur are but variations of a singular physical type with a common racial origin, a cousin people. Indeed, the cranial types are nearly indistinguishable. And they show you this here. It's interesting that the nose is always broken off. Interesting. Sumerian king Gudea, Hammurabi, Akkadian king. And they lived about, 300 to 400 years difference. The remains reported by L.H. Dudley Buxton and D. Talbot Rice in 1931 for the Field Museum and Oxford Expeditions were excavated in a 4th millennium BCE Sumerian palace in eastern Kish that was used as a cemetery by a Semitic, which is Akkadian, dynasty of the 3rd millennia BCE. Both Sumerians and Akkadians were buried there, and it is thus no surprise that both physical types found by Keith in Al-Ubad and Ur were found together among the Kish remains. Buxton and Rice offer a revealing description of these remains regarding the Sumerian remains. The forehead was retreating, and the brow ridges were always prominent. The cheekbones were rather broad, and the nose also was broad, in some case inclining to extreme plattering. There can be no doubt that this type is that which has been described by Sergio Guffrey. Hold on a second there. The remains reported on by L.H. Dudley Buxton and D. Talbot Rice in 1931 for the Field Museum at Oxford expedition were excavated in a 4th millennium BCE Sumerian palace in eastern Kish that was used as a cemetery by a Semitic, the Akkadian, dynasty of the 3rd millennium BCE. Both Sumerians and Akkadians were buried there, and it is thus no surprise that both physical types found by Keith in Al-Ubad and Ur were found together among the Kish remains. Buxton and Rice offer a revealing description of these remains. Regarding the Sumerian remains, the forehead was retreating and the brow ridges were always prominent. The cheekbones were rather broad and the nose was also broad, in some cases inclining to extreme platyrrhine. There can be no doubt that this type is that which has been described by Sergei Gufrida, Rigeri, and Fleur, and named the Urification type. Regarding the Akkadian remains, the second type is also dolichocephalic, long-headed, and in some cases it is not always easy to distinguish it from the other. Although typical specimens are clear enough, the main distinction occurs in the contours, which are rounded when viewed from the top and not angular as the previous type. The eyebrow ridges, which in the first type were well marked, are nearly absent, and the occiput is especially prominent. The orbs are usually horizontal, and the whole build is markedly slender. There can be little hesitation in ascribing this type to the people who have been called by Elliott Smith the brown race. The Sumerian remains show a strong negroid nose, which is also reflected in the artist's representation of the Sumerians. Ernest Babylon, in his Manual of Oriental Antiquities, describes 2 Sumerian sculpted heads from the Neo-Sumerian period, which is 2340 BC to 1932 BC. So it's like a 1,000-year difference. They are of blackest diorite with bluish tinge. The man's head found in the great courtyard is of a life size, the hair and beard completely shaven. As in certain Egyptian statues, the eyebrows form an exaggerated projection above enormous eyes. The skull is elongated remarkably. The mutilated nose alone prevents us from having a complete type of the Chaldean race, with its hard features and thick sensual lips. In a neighboring tale, M. de Sarze found another head of the same size and of an equally interesting type. It is less severe in aspect than the preceding one, but carved with equal skill. The face is round and almost smiling, the chin broad and powerful, the nose flat. The very original headdress is composed of woolen cap, fitting closely to the head and furnished with a thick border, which, turning up, forms a sort of crown. The meshes of woolen tissues are conventionally marked by a number of symmetrical rolls. The Sumerian statuary thus suggests a long-headed, flat-nosed, thick-lipped people consistent with the skeletal evidence. It is to be noted that this nasal mutilation mentioned by Babylon is found often and reminds us of the treatment of Negroid or Africoid status from Egypt and elsewhere, provoking Hermer Herrnstein to remark, "It would appear the Sphinx got off lightly." So these are some of the things they're talking about. Heads discussed by Babylon. They always mutilating the noses. This fact of the negritude of the ancient Sumerians is implications and probably the sentiment of those responsible for the nasal mutilations of the statuary were well articulated by H.G. Spearing in 1913. These people, in later times called Sumerians, had reached a fairly high stage of civilization long before their independence was threatened by outsiders. This discovery was very disconcerting to the itinerary historians and philologists, for the race was proved to be not a branch of the civilizing Aryans, nor of the gifted Semites, but of a Negroid people having affinities with the Mongols. These results were not obtained by men sitting comfortably in libraries and building up theories without observing facts. Lives were risked and lives were lost in collecting the material for the scientific study of these long forgotten races. The conclusions arrived at scandalized the philological world, which was comfortably convinced that none but a Semitic or Aryan people could have been the originators of civilization. So that's H.G. Spearing. This is consistent with what we learn from the linguistic evidence. The Sumerian language, hereafter Sum, is a bona fide African language. Hermer Ernstein's book, Black Summer, The African Origins of Civilization, makes a strong case for Sum as genetically related to the Niger-Congo, hereafter NC languages of West Africa. He argues that the original speakers likely originated many millennia before the Common Era, BCE, in Middle Africa, around 10,000 years ago. They may have migrated toward the Horn and out of the desiccating Sahara into Afrabia before 3000 BCE. They seem to have reached the alluvial plains of Mesopotamia by sea. Campbell Dunn came to the same conclusion. Sumeria appears to have moved out of Africa originally from the Congo or a Bantu area before 3000 BC, to judge from the archaeological evidence. Those people who built the marvelous civilizations by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers were also akin to the Dravidians, judging from the skeletal remains as well as the linguistics. Dravidian languages show a string affinity with African languages. So right now we're going to end it off here. We'll look at some of this, and let's look at some of this here. He's got his footnotes there, as Dr. Wesley always has his footnotes, just showing you some of the Dravidians in South India. The skeletal and linguistic evidence suggests that the ancient Sumerians were akin to the Dravidians. Sumerians surely did not look like Life magazine's depiction of them. White people just love to lie on history. So anyway, let's stop it right here, and you guys let me know what you think. Peace.